afternoon, everyone. This is our Creature Research Series. I am Wessie Ling, Professor of Transcultural Arts and Design from the School of Art, Architecture and Design, and Director of Creature. A very warm welcome to all of you. Please be reminded that we are recording the session. The recording will be available following today's event. When ready, it will be uploaded on Creature website. You will find it in our archive. We ask the audience to mute yourself and switch off your camera to avoid intervention during the seminar. And the chat box, I think the chat box is actually working now. So if you'd like to leave any comments or questions, you can do so. We will also pick it up in our Q&A session. What we're going to do is that we will have two presentations, one after the next, and then we will follow by Q&A towards the end of the session. So Archive, Material Culture and Participation is a two-part series examining the potential of archive and the ways in which new heritage and activities are derived from its contemporary relevance. We are very excited to have two speakers today. Our colleague Gina Pierce is with us alongside our external guest, Katie Waring of EC Contemporary, who was with us in our research series of Multicultural Art Institutions at the Crossroads back in 2021. So thank you so much for taking part in our event, Katie, and a warm welcome to you both. We will start off with Katie, who will present Multicultural Heritage at the Crossroads, documenting the Chinese Arts Center Residence Program. In 2021, EC Contemporary, previously known as the Center for Contemporary Chinese Art, carried out a cataloging project to progress archival records relating to Chinese Arts Center Artist in Residence Program in the early 2000s, with the support of Creature. The Multicultural Arts Institution at the Crossroads project processed documentation created by the organization and the artists involved in the program, comprising both physical and non-digital materials. The work was largely carried out during the COVID lockdown when access to the gallery was limited. Katie's talk will look at the history of the organization's residence program and explore the challenges of processing a hybrid collection remotely. So without further ado, over to you now, Katie.
Just gonna share my screen. Okay, I hope everybody can see that. So I'm Katie Waring, and I'm the archivist at EC Contemporary. And today I'm going to talk about the history of our Artists in Resin program, EC Contemporary, formerly the Centre for Chinese Contemporary Art. This is in response to the Multicultural Heritage at the Crossroads cataloguing project, which took place in 2021 with support of Creature at London Metropolitan University. So in this session, I'm going to look at 4 different areas related to this topic. Initially, I'm just going to have a quick introduction up to EC Contemporary and the development of our residency programme. An overview of the heritage collections we hold at EC Contemporary and how they are managed. And then I'm going to look at examples of how artists have developed works in response to our collections. And then I'll do a review of the cataloguing project and examine some of the issues that were faced while trying to process a collection during the COVID lockdown when access to the gallery was very limited. So initially, I'm just going to give you a quick historical background about the organisation. So EC Contemporary is the UK's only non-profit art centre specialising in presenting and platforming artists and art practices that identify with and are informed by East and Southeast Asian cultural backgrounds. We are based in an award-winning building in the heart of Manchester, which is also the home to one of the largest East Asian populations in the UK. The organisation has continuously evolved to establish itself as a dynamic and engaging space for cross-cultural exchanges in the British art scene as well as a global context. So the organisation itself began as a Chinese View Arts Association in 1987. The charity was founded by the organisers of the Chinese View Arts Festival, a community orientated arts festival held in Manchester in 1986. The charity aimed to use arts to foster a stronger sense of cultural identity in the local East Asian community, as well as increase the public's awareness of Chinese culture. In 1989, the association opened the Chinese Art Centre in Manchester's Chinatown. The centre was the first art centre of its kind in the UK to focus on East Asian arts and culture. In 1997, the organisation relocated to Edge Street in Manchester's northern quarter with a new emphasis on bringing contemporary Chinese art and artists to a larger audience. The new venue also gave the centre the opportunity to commission site-specific works for its new commission scheme. Operating between 2000 and 2002, the scheme commissioned works by emerging UK-based artists of East and Southeast Asian heritage who were given full responsibility for the management of their exhibitions. The artists were based at the venue while they developed their work and can be seen as our first resident artists at the organisation. So in 2003, with the support of the Arts Council Big Lottery Fund, the organisation moved to its current venue on Thomas Street, just around the corner from where we'd previously been based in the Northern Quarter. As well as a purpose-built gallery space, the new venue also included a living space where artists could develop work on site. Initially termed Project Space, the studio living area provided private accommodation for artists as well as providing access to other on-site facilities. Initially, the organisation offered two types of residency, a 3-month residency called Breathe, which were open to established UK-based and international artists. There was no pressure for the artists to produce an exhibition at the end of their residency, but they were asked to hold at least one event to present their work to the public. This was usually an open studio event, but artists also developed performances, gave talks about their practice, and arranged workshops for visitors. Initially, Breathe artists were selected through an annual open call, but later they became a mixture of open calls and collaborative residencies developed with other arts organisations in the UK and East Asia. Um, we also, as well as the longer residencies, the organisation also offered shorter 2-week whisper residencies aimed at emerging artists. Initially, these were only open to artists from Northwest England, but from 2005, the remit was expanded to UK-based artists. The aim of these shorter residencies was to give the artists the opportunity to experience their first residency, and they were closely linked to the artist career support programs that were run by the organisation in the early 2000s. Over time, the organisation continued to evolve, becoming an important international hub for Chinese contemporary art. In 2003, the Chinese Art Centre was renamed the Centre for Chinese Contemporary Art to reflect this ethos. Artist residencies began to be more closely linked to the main exhibition programme, and the terms breathe and whisper were no longer used to distinguish the length of residencies. More recently, after a period of redevelopment and transformation, the organisation has recently relaunched with a new identity and mission. The organisation now platforms artists and art practices that are informed by East and Southeast Asian experiences under its new name, esea Contemporary. The residency programme was a hugely important part of our past programme, and we're proud of the work it facilitated. Currently, the organisation is exploring new ways of using our spaces at the organisation and investigating different ways we can work with artists in our building in the future. So that's a quick overview of our history and where we are now. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the heritage collections that we hold. So at esea Contemporary, our heritage collections are split into two areas. We have the library collection, which comprises a small but important collection of publications relating to EC contemporary art and contemporary art in general. The publications have been sourced from around the world and includes exhibition programs, artist monographs, and festival publications. Um, uh, these have been sourced from many different sources. So they've been collected over the years by staff. They've been donated by artists working with the organisations, and more recently, we've started actively purchasing books for the library collection. Our archive collection comprises the historical records of EC Contemporary and its predecessors dating from 1986. We also hold some small archive collections which have been deposited with the organisation more recently. Our collections are managed separately because we follow documentation and access procedures developed by the archive and library sector. Our archive collections are documented following the International Standard for Archival Description General, or ISAD-G, and an associated standard called Records in Context. Our library collections are documented following the International Standard for Bibliographic Description, ISBD, and the Functional Requirements for Bibliographic Records, which is FRBR, lots of acronyms. Um, information on our collections can be found on our online catalogue. As well as information about our collections we hold, the online catalogue also includes detailed information about our past programme and information on the people and organisations who appear in our collections. At the moment, our online catalogue is in the process of being updated to reflect our new identity and should be relaunched later this year, but you can link to it from the existing catalogue from our organisational website. So the materials processed during the Multicultural Heritage and the Crossroads project are part of EC Contemporary's organisational archive. So I'm quickly going to provide an overview of what is in the collection and how it is managed. So this collection comprises the business records of the organisation from the first Chinese View Arts Festival in 1986. As well as our programme history, the collection also documents the administration of the organisation and our other activities such as our work with artists, engagement programme and other projects. Unfortunately, we have very little material dating before 1998, as many of our early records were lost in a fire at the time. All the materials in the collection are sourced directly from EC Contemporary's filing systems when they are no longer required for active business use. This means it is what can be termed a live collection, which will continue to grow and develop over time, and we're continually getting more material added to the collection. Groups of material which are transferred to the collection will be treated as a single accession. As far as possible, each accession will be processed in a way so its original order is maintained. This is important in archive theory to preserve the contextual information that is related to how an organization's how a collection is organized. So it can tell you information about who created it, why it was created, and why it was managed in such a way. So the structure of our collection, because it's continually growing, also needs to reflect the changing focus of the organisation over a large period of time. Therefore, materials are also presented within a hierarchy based upon the main functions of the organisation, as well as within their original order that they were sent to the archive. This is to help researchers browse our collection. So, where was I? Right. So, our heritage collections, and I was talking about I'll start this bit again because I wasn't sure whereabouts it cut out about our actual collections. So, the archive collection that we hold at EC Contemporary comprises the business records of the organisation from the first Chinese View Arts Festival in 1986, as well as our programme history. The collection also documents the administration of the organisation and our other activities such as our work with artists, engagement programme and other projects. Unfortunately, we have very little materials dating from before 1998, as many of our early records were lost in a fire at the time. All the material in the collection is sourced directly from EC Contemporary's filing systems when they are no longer required for active business use. This means a live collection will continue to grow and develop over time. Groups of materials are transferred to the collection are treated as a single accession. As far as possible, each accession will be processed in a way to retain its original order, to preserve important contextual information and ensure the integrities of the records within the accession. The structure of the collection also needs to reflect the changing focus of the organisation over a large period of time. So materials are presented within hierarchy based upon the main function of the organisation as well as within their original order. This also helps researchers browse our collection hierarchy. We also index our archive collection by our past events, associated people and organisations, and subject terms taken from established subject indexes. Although our early records are mostly physical items, the majority of our collection dating from 2003 are only available in digital format. At least 70% of the collection comprises born digital materials, and this percentage will grow over time. Due to the fragility of born digital materials, we need to actively preserve the form and content of the records. To make our digital collections accessible, we have developed workflows which enable us to create surrogates to preserve the original files and provide access copies which can be viewed either via our internal database or online through our online catalogue. So, um, so now I'm just going to go through, introduce you to a couple of works that have been developed by artists who have, in response to our collections. I've only chosen 3 examples of works developed by resident artists, but our collections have also been used by local students to develop their own work and other artists in response to our collections. So the first work I'm going to look at is a performance called You Know I Told You So that was developed by AAD Howe in 2018. Now, AAD Howe is a performance artist researcher whose practice engages fiction, techno-biographical inquiries, multimedia technology, and philosophy with performance. She developed You Know I Told You So during the first archive and library residency at the organisation in 2018. The residency was a short experimental residency to explore how our heritage collections could be used to inform the organisation's programme. It was the first time I'd actually directly worked with an artist, and it was a completely new experience for me because it was the first time I'd had to actually actively share a space with an artist within the collections. Um, Arda was actually based in the archiving library for 2 weeks to develop new work responding to the theme, the body as an archive. I'm just going to read a description taken from the artist's website to explain about what was the idea behind the work. So her description is, You Know I Told You So pulls out the processed voices from the archive using live performance, spoken words and sound mixing to recreate ephemeral situation of entanglement with the past and rapidly changing present. In order to register and move through lost or alienation to reincarnate the lost and non-determined past in the present and to pass it on with the mourn for our differences. So what was interesting to me about this work, that it was more looking at the concept of archives rather than responding to an actual item in the archive. I think it was like responding to the idea about archives holding all this memory and being able to that we can access this memory and it's already there. It's just people need to use archives to be able to access the memory that already exists. um, the second work I'm going to look at is another performance that was developed by an artist called Ting Ting Cheng in 2019, and this was called A Turning Away from Debates That Have Not Been Concluded. Ting Ting Cheng was our resident artist in 2019. Her work was in response to a report on, a report on a seminar called A New Vocabulary for Chinese Arts, which was arranged by the organisation in 1998. The seminar intended to redefine the terminology Chinese in a cultural context. The seminar explored the questions such as who needs labels and why is it for artists to define themselves or others to define them. The textual report is the only remaining documentation of the discussion at the seminar, which included a debate between notable art practitioners of the time. Using the report as a starting point, the artist contacted people who attended the seminar in 1998 to discuss the same questions within the current context. The artist also invited 3 Manchester-based performers to discuss the same topics. Ting Ting combined the report, the interviews and discussions with performers and other material found in the archive and related essays to construct a conversation which was enacted by 4 performers. The restaged debate constantly evolved, grew, and was repeated throughout the performance without being resolved. As the artist puts on her own website, as the title suggests, it's a debate that's never been concluded. Um, the third work I'm going to look at is one developed by a artist called Haley Saviste. She's a Manchester-based sound artist who took part in a archive and library residency at the height of COVID in 2020. She developed her work based upon recordings created during an oral history project at the carried out in the organisation in 2018. The oral histories were created from elder members of the local East Asian community who were asked to talk about their migrant experience, their identity as people of Chinese heritage living in the UK, and memories of Manchester's Chinatown and Chinese festivals. As part of the residency, Haley use these with other things to produce a geolocative sound walk based around the vicinity of our original venue on 36 Charlotte Street. Meeting Place laid original sound compositions and field recordings with photographs and recordings from our collections. The audio for this work was mixed with 360-degree binaural audio, providing a fully immersive experience that sonically animates the archive material. The work was created in a way that people could experience the work while the city was still under lockdown restrictions. Using the Echoes app, the sound walk could be enjoyed by visitors at their own pace while remaining socially distanced. So that's how we're looking at different ways our works have been used. I'm going to now very quickly, hopefully not gone too long about this, look at the Multicult Heritage at the Crossroads project and the cataloguing project. Um, the project aimed to widen access to the records in our organisational residency programme related to our residency programme. Just so basically, the main aim of the project was to sort of make the actual records accessible, but also produce contextual information about the individual residencies. And this is all this information is available via our online catalogue. Almost the entire project had to be carried out remotely, which affected the types of material we processed. For this reason, the project concentrated upon processing born digital records, which could be accessible via remote access to our archive server. The first step of the project was to initially review all the relevant materials that could be potentially processed during the project. The materials mostly came from accessions, which were all backups of the organisation file servers or from devices used by member of staff. There was also some material from other accessions which had been formerly held on physical storage media, but had been uploaded to our archive storage area when the premise was still accessible. In total, this comprised about 22 gig of data, and approximately this was like over 4,000 files, and it was unlikely the entirety of this material would be fully processed before the end of the project. Therefore, we aim to make sure that the overall folder structure of the accessions would be mirrored in the database, and then we would populate it with as many of the records we could process within the timescale. Once we identified the relevant materials, we had to count basic processing to make sure the the records could be processed. Initially, we created a file list for each accession. This was done using software called Droid, which is from the National Archives. And this is a software tool that can batch identify formats of digital records, as well as document other relevant file information that we need for the documentation process. This data is served as a spreadsheet, which will act as our initial file list for each accession. We also used another application called EXIF tool, which was used to extract metadata from the original files that was also to be used for the documentation process. Um, Secondly, we had to review the accessions to make sure that all the material is suitable for permanent retention. This is things such as drafts and duplicates of materials that were not related to the organisation. This was informed by the organisation's retention schedule. It defines how long data should be maintained by the organisation and when it should be transferred to the archive collection or disposed of. We also had to have an overview of any potential access problems. We had to make sure that we were able to access all the different types of files within the collection. Um, and also that we could process these and create digital surrogates of them. Mostly this was fine because most of the things were standard text or image files, but we did have some video files that would need additional processing. So I had to make sure I had software available to be able to process them. We also had to identify who were the intellectual property holders of all the records to ensure we can make them available to researchers. We found that most of the materials were either the copyright of the organisation or we had permission from the individual artists in their original contracts to use the material for archives purposes. However, in this case, many of the records can only be made available in a dedicated terminal on site at the organisation, and we can't make everything available online. We'd only be able to do this if we had permission of every single copyright holder within the collection, and there just wasn't the time available to do that at that time. Um, we also had to review all the records containing personal data to make sure there was nothing that we couldn't open up to the public. Once we once we'd reviewed all the material, then we then allocated identifiers that would become the permanent references for the materials. Then we set about creating the hierarchy of the folders within our database. And this mirrored the original hierarchy of how the folders were created in the original accessions. Once all that was done, then we could start to actually process the individual files. We prioritized the administration records because we felt these records would inform the context of the material to be processed later. And to simplify the process, we processed a folder at the time, starting with the documentation, followed by the creation of surrogates, and we embedded metadata into the surrogates. And then finally, the data was uploaded, the data and the media uploaded to our database. So I was going to go in a lot more detail, but I'll not go into too much detail with that. So once these steps were completed, all the data was uploaded to our database. And so at the end of the project, we had successfully added the hierarchy of all the accessions being processed, as well as records related to the administration of our residency program up to 2010, and then documentation relating to individual resident artists up to early 2006. And in total, 1,084 individual files were processed. And of these, nearly 700 of the digital surrogates are fully available on the online catalogue. So what was interesting about this project, it allowed us to better understand how our residency program worked and have a better idea how it developed and managed over time. And we have this information, and in terms of for the archive, the information is all available on our online catalogue. So I apologise for everything, all the issues with internet. I hope everybody got most of that. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, please ask me later.
Thank you so much, Katie. Well, this is wonderful, and
I'm sorry about internet
no
problems.
worries. I mean, this could happen, but we get hold of all of your presentations, so this is great, and thank you so much for that. I don't know what's happened with the screen. Is it because you're sharing your screen, and therefore I kind of see myself on the slow motion? Right. Okay, that's great. I'm sure there are lots of questions, and I know that you forgot to tell the audience that the archive will become live and will open soon as a sort of physical site.
Yes, yeah, sorry. Yeah, I just should have mentioned that. If any, because of everything else going on with the internet, just to let everybody know that the gallery itself is due to open this week for the first time in 2 years. So we have our first exhibition since 2021, I think it is due to open this week, and and if anybody wants to know more information about the organisation, please go to our website and sign up for our newsletter, which will keep you updated on all the events coming up at the organisation.
Perfect. Thank you for this. Well, we'll come back to you on questions. So we're not taking questions for now, but obviously we have time for the Q&A towards the end of the session. So we'll go straight to another presenter. But well, thank you so much, Katie. That is absolutely wonderful, and really lucky to have all the presentation without having you sort of frozen somewhere else. So we're still lucky to a certain extent. So I would like to now welcome our second presenter, Gina Pierce. Gina will discuss democratizing the textile archive, museums, and archives that are, I mean, somehow the museums and archives that she's discussing, she particularly felt that they are committed to the preservation of our cultural heritage, and so are ever seeking new ways to ensure they stay relevant to contemporary demands. Her research proposes that by becoming a resource of creative opportunity, they can have a meaningful impact. Through a series of participation projects, this presentation demonstrates how the contents of our design history institutions can be disseminated, allowing for new interpretations and contributions from outside of academy. These interventions enable the democratization of the contents of the collection, so the archive is imbued with a contemporary relevance. The participatory projects are undertaken using the Parker Knoll archive in the special collections at our university, London Metropolitan University. So there are obviously seemingly similarities between Gina's and also Katie's approach in related to the archive. Those are actually actively opening up for participation and finding new ways to engage with artists, audience. So we can't wait to hear more to Gina's presentation. So I'll hand the floor to you, Gina.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And hello, everybody. I'm Gina Pierce. Thanks very much to Wessie for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to hope I can share my presentation okay, so hopefully you can now see my slides.
Yes, I can see that. That's perfect.
Great, great. Yes, so thank you very much to Wessie for inviting me and to Katie for a very interesting talk. So the title of my talk today is Democratising the Textile Archive. And I'll be discussing some of my research for my PhD thesis, which aims to present a new methodology for working in and with archives to engage a wider audience. So I initially set out to question how the archive contents themselves can support the process of opening up to a wider audience. And the democratisation within the title here is used in the sense of describing an equality of access to and distribution of the archive. My intention was to find creative solutions within the archive itself that would help to reach out to a wider audience than might usually have had an interest in the contents. In this presentation, I'm going to focus on how I went about developing my methodology and a couple of projects that demonstrate this methodology in action. So we think of archives as places where the records of our heritage and culture are stored, safe for future generations. And as such, they are of necessity out of sight. And even artifacts with digitised visual information may be seldom accessed. So I'm showing here the front page of one of the most recognised of our institutions, the V&A Museum. Yet, how many of us would request access to see something here that is in the collections, so in their archive? Many thousands of items in storage, as indicated on the website, which will not be accessed with any frequency. When these artifacts are taken out to be examined, it's usually for study by academics or researchers. So my aim with my research was to demonstrate that when a wider audience is engaged with the archive, the impact of a creative approach brings beneficial outputs to both the participants and the trustees of the archive. My research references the Parker Knoll archive held in the Frederick Parker collection at London Metropolitan University. And I use this collection as a case study for the application of methods and methodology. This is the archive of what was a very well-known and successful 20th century furniture company who were eventually taken over by a succession of other companies and then eventually went out of business in the 1990s. The university now cares for the archive, which is particularly known for this chair collection, and it's preserved for study and for reference. The artifacts are catalogued and can be searched online. Some of the content is digitised, so for example, images of historic furniture or promotional material can easily be accessed. However, along with much of the archive material, we are unlikely to go out of our way to research into it unless we have good reason. The Parker Knoll archive is a mixed archive, demonstrating a variety of source material. From my perspective as a printed textile designer, I was attracted to the sample books showing upholstery fabrics used on the Parker Knoll chairs from the late 1940s to the 1950s. When I discovered these, I particularly wanted to know more about them for myself, and of course I also wanted to let others know about them. My research is practice-based, meaning it's from the perspective of my position as a textile screen printer. The patterns from textile archives are often used commercially for prints and wallpapers, but I just want to say here that for research, this is a cul-de-sac, and I've taken the archive as a resource for inspiration for new original outcomes that don't copy or appropriate imagery. I do not want to simply replicate fabric designs, but instead use them along with other items in the archive to inspire new design work. So for my research, I wanted to test out my approach for engaging a wider audience with the archive through my own response, using the fabric samples as a starting point. So I created this new design with the intention that this would be a link to inspire others to investigate further. And in this first project, I blended motifs from the florals together and printed a one-colour fabric. I then gave a metre of the fabric to a range of different people and asked them to do whatever they wanted with it, with the only stipulation that they would take photos a few weeks later and send them to me. Very briefly summing up the results of this experiment, the outcomes from this project were very varied, and some participants didn't know what to do with the fabric at all, while others had no trouble using the fabric resourcefully. From this, I understood the projects needed to be designed for particular groups of participants and with different end outcomes in mind. I also realised that my own response reaching out to participants, so creating a bridge for them to the archive, needed to be identified as such, and I labelled this the interpretive object, an overarching term for practical outcomes that I produce. Although those who had done nothing with the fabric felt they'd not taken part, they actually provided the most useful information, that the interpretive object should be tailored to suit the participant group, and that any outcome is a successful one. All projects should therefore result in the participants using their creativity, and the interpretive object should be designed to suit the group taking part. Following this project, I continued developing the methodology for designing the interpretive objects, with an understanding that a sense of democratizing the archive includes the artifacts themselves. I selected not the well-known Park and Knoll chairs, but instead the less well-known work of the backroom, the factory, and the many anonymous workers. The use of these artifacts I found was reflected in my reading at the time, which looked to the theories of inanimate matter becoming an actant or a force, particularly in the writings of Jane Bennett and Bruno LaTour. Their theories tie in with a sense of an awareness of environmental considerations, but go further, looking at ourselves in context with our surroundings. This follows the concept of an equality between ourselves, the natural world, our material possessions, and the force of events in our lives. The flattening of the hierarchies in the material world, in which we usually place ourselves above and in the centre of other considerations. So, as I say, one of the key influences on my methodology came from the reading of the philosopher Bruno LaTour, who defined the actor network theory as a new concept of a network between human and non-human actors, or an actant, which is defined as a source for action. This network can be a combination of either human, a non-human object, or a force that, situated within a contextualized event, causes further events to happen. So by creating a network, and for me this was through my practical work, objects and forces can be linked together to create something new. So the archive is particularly singled out by LaTour as an example of being a place where documents and objects disappear and become forever unconnected with human intentions, until they are made alive again by some historian. So he wouldn't have envisaged a textile designer working in an archive and making objects become alive again. So I have adapted this theory, and I find it particularly useful that he says that this is why specific tricks have to be invented to make them talk. That is, to offer up descriptions of themselves, to produce scripts of what they're making others, humans or non-humans, do. So, back in the Park and Knoll archive, I used the LaTour theory as a springing off point for my own methodology to combine artefacts in a network united together in the practical work. In addition to the fabric samples, I found artefacts that inspire me. For example, the colour palette from a 1950s brochure and the upholstery cutting patterns of furniture. The latter particularly represented the work of anonymous technicians whose drawings had been packed away safely but unseen for 70 years. These, together with the linen fabric to print on, which references the linen samples, and the screen printing process enacted through myself, combined to become a network to create my response to the archive. Seen here are my designs for fabric and digital print on Tyvek paper, created from the network of objects and forces. This freshly creative artwork highlights a contribution from overlooked aspects of the businesses. The theory gives the material object power as an actant, arguing for a greater acknowledgement of the role of the inanimate as a force with the ability to create effect. Using this methodology, unexpected juxtapositions between the items are seen to bring about new patterns and colour palettes. So these become the interpretive object, a link that constitutes the juncture between the archive and the wider audience, and which contributes to a definition of a new category of participatory project. The practice demonstrates the embodiment of the selected artefacts, combined into a new design outcome, which then become independent. They stand alone as such, but also provide a link and a demonstration for how the archive can be used by others. Another concept for an interpretive object, these collaged folding books combine the floral motifs once again with their original colour palette and lines, marks and letterings from account books. The book format referred back to the sample books, but the unfolding action additionally referred to the sense of discovery when opening boxes within the archive, not knowing what will be found. So myself as a textile researcher in the archive became a component in the network. The collage books led to the idea for a participatory project that was designed for all types of participants, one that could be undertaken by anyone without an ability or interest in design or art or the archive. So very briefly, my research looked at the benefits of taking part in the acts of making and the understanding that a satisfactory response to the archive would be one that stimulated a creative outcome. So these two folding books were printed and emailed to a very wide range of different people, including children, so they could print them out, fold and complete them in any way they wanted. They then sent me photos of their books, both opened out as a sheet and folded. And as you can see, my designs reflect the collage books and the cutting plans design. So there was a huge variation in the responses. However, the feedback was universally positive, with many older participants saying that it was the first time they coloured or painted for many years. Some children sent me films of them opening their books and turning the pages, so I could see how they completed the books. A group from an access course into higher education sent me zines, which are these very low-tech magazines that they'd made using the little books. So they'd printed them out and used them to create, to personalise them as their own zines. So the aim to use the interpretive object to inspire a creative response was successfully demonstrated here. The folding book acts as a link between the archive and the audience, in this case to an activity which stimulates their imagination and employs their hand skills. This creative outcome as an end in itself was identified as a new use for the archive. So, on to the live project that I undertook with students here at London Metropolitan University with the BA Textiles students in 2021. This was undertaken with the commercial company Knoll, represented by Tom White, the design director, and assisted by Joe Butters, the creative director. This company trades as Knoll, but it's not a continuation of the original company. It's a new company that's set up about 7 years ago. So as you may notice from the date, this was undertaken during COVID restrictions. Therefore, the project took place against the backdrop of an unprecedented time in which the university, and thus the archive, the Frederick Parker collection, was closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This situation meant that the students were unable to study the Knoll fabric books and all other artefacts in the archives, and that the whole project would have to be taught online. This couldn't have been foreseen at the time of arranging the live project, so adaptations had to be made to the research, delivery, and communication between all the participants. The situation made this research project particularly significant as it demonstrated the methodology which had informed the creation of the interpretive object being tested in a real-life situation. More than in any other participatory project within this thesis, the theory could be fully implemented, examining the effectiveness of the methodology. The situation in which the students were restricted in their access to independent research made the interpretive object an integral aspect of the project. The project brief was to design furnishing fabrics for the new Knoll furniture, inspired by the archive. As can be seen in the image here, there's a wide range of fabrics for the public to choose from, and this is just a very small selection of them. Designing upholstery fabrics for Knoll entails an understanding of the market for their furniture, particularly their chairs, and the practical requirements that are necessary. An aesthetic that fulfills these demands is one with a mass market appeal, using a design and colour palette aimed at a very broad demographic. I introduced the project to the Level 5 students in an online presentation of the brief and a talk giving some background on Knoll, the archive, and the current Knoll company, with images of their furniture and fabrics. I then showed a presentation of my own research work with the interpretive object. And additional to some of those that you've seen already, these are some screen prints produced using the shapes of the chairs, the upholstery patterns, and the colours again from the promotional leaflet. I didn't want the students to be unduly influenced by the interpretive object, so my own research priorities weren't shared with them. However, I wanted to be able to assess if the students would make any use of my responses in any capacity, independently and without instruction. So the overarching research question for the live project with Knoll was, can the design response to the archive, known as the interpretive object, help to facilitate student use of the archival object to create new outcomes? So I gave examples of digital experimentation and my use of collage. These are accounts and records of chair sales, so demonstrating that artifacts that are very different to the fabric samples could be used as starting points and combined in networks to create ideas for designs. The accounts and the letters were used in the folding collage books seen earlier. The technique of collage is one that I find very useful for developing ideas, so I wanted to show this to students using the lettering, again the shapes from the chairs and the colour palette from the fabric samples. And my abstracted chair screen prints adapted as paper prints with slogans from the Park and Knoll adverts of the 1950s. The students developed their work independently at home with online support from the staff team in taught sessions and in tutorials. So shown here are some of the mood boards that were presented by the students at an interim presentation to Tom and Joe from Park and Knoll. We were very fortunate to have generous and interested partners in Tom and Joe. They treated all the student work with interest and equal attention. And when presenting, the students were encouraged to each talk about their work and were given verbal feedback. Following the presentation, Tom described the qualities that they looked for when selecting furnishing fabrics and their own process in shaping the aesthetics of the Park and Knoll brand. The student work was incredibly varied, both in their initial selection of archive material and in their methods of developing ideas. The production of actual printed fabrics was very limited with the equipment they had to use at home. And the weavers had taken home small looms, so were able to weave, and they all worked digitally. At the end of the project, Tom and Joe selected 4 students who they thought had successfully produced designs that could be suitable for Park and Knoll furniture. This student was inspired by an original flame stitch weave on an early chair in the collection, seen here on the left. She combined her version of this with colour palettes from a mix of archive fabrics. Another used the lettering and the numbers taken from the sales records, as I had done, and abstracted them into design textures. Another used abstracted chairs, very different from my own, but also taken from early photographs in the factory, identifying different types of source material for inspiration. This student demonstrates that collage was used for development. This was a design that the design directors very much liked, and the single motifs here are combined into digital repeats. Finally, this student combined florals from the samples with her own drawings of lace, then abstracted them, and her work was selected as the most suitable for Park and Knoll. Although it had not been the original intention that any of the fabrics would be actually put into production, Park and Knoll was so pleased with these designs that they continued to work with this student and developed a range of fabrics that they launched last year. So this is the selected winning fabric on one of the Park and Knoll chairs in their showroom. So this was an unexpected but very pleasing outcome to the live project. For my research, the project demonstrated the use of the interpretive object as a tool for introducing the archive to a new audience. In terms of the archive artefacts used by the students, they made extensive use of a mixed range of artefacts. The imagery of the chair designs, old photographs and promotional leaflets, in addition to the fabric sample books. An assessment of their use of the interpretive object was made by analysing the design outcomes, the verbal comments and the written feedback of the students. And most usefully, the student whom Park and Knoll selected as producing the best design work overall gave a comprehensive description of her experience during the project, including the following paragraph on the interpretive object. Gina's work on the archives showed us how seeing the original textile samples and working drawings can be useful inspiration. Her work showed how the use of an original motif can be turned into a fresh new hand-printed fabric, and the way she extracted shapes from the chairs to make abstract designs with bright colours inspired by the 1950s, made me look into the classic winged armchairs. It has shown me that inspirational starting points are not always obvious, and it could be good to dig into the archives as opposed to always the latest and loudest imagery. This was a very satisfying reflection for me to read, as the student made clear that she'd understood the purpose of the interpretive object and had changed her approach to designing as a consequence. Overall, the project was successful for both the students and for Parker Knoll in terms of the pedagogical outcomes and making connections between education and industry. The methodology can serve as an adaptable approach for use in other textile and mixed archives, where the contents have had limited use due to low visibility in the community and beyond. It can be applied to archives and collections where there is a desire to introduce new audiences or to work in collaboration or participation with groups outside the academic institution.
Thank you, Gina. This is wonderful.
Okay, I'm going to try and stop sharing now.
Great. Thank you so much. That is really exhaustive and that's wonderful experience and great to see student work as well. So thank you very much for sharing. I want to bring in Katie on stage, and perhaps we would like to open up questions on the floor. I have some questions in mind, but obviously I am mindful that we have about 20 minutes left. So I would first like to open question to the floor to see whether we have some burning questions where audience would like to ask. Any of you in the audience would like to ask a question, please unmute yourself and also switch on your camera so we can also see you. Jane, do you want to ask a question?
No, sorry, I wasn't. I just thought you wanted everyone to switch their cameras on.
Right. I was thinking that those who want to ask a question, then maybe we can switch the camera on so we can just have a conversation at that end, just because then it would be, if we're less people switching on to the camera, then hopefully the internet will goes better. So I hope that it makes sense. Thank you. So anybody who want to ask a question, or should I start off by asking, I mean, for Katie, I was very interested in, I mean, you present a very exhaustive approach of how to document the resident host program and also the hierarchy of files that you are talking about. I'm particularly interested in the nature of organizational archive, because what actually disdained from perhaps Parker Knoll that Gina is working in, and your archive is that there are other materials, for example, the rationale of curation, who curated, why is it curated, the organization history and the evolution and such is also in the archive, which is quite distinct from any sort of public institution archive, which they're focusing on archival materials. And I wonder whether any sort of initiative has been sort of made in promoting these archival materials to be known in the public, or what is the use of these sort of organizational archival materials? How does it situate it within your archive?
So in our situation, I think we haven't had a lot of, we are still, I think lockdowns affected a lot of things with our organisation, so things over the last few years have been very quiet, but I think generally the archive itself, as well as bringing in researchers or people using our materials, it's also been a vital tool for the organisation itself. So in terms of this, the archive and library residencies we've done, where the artists have been basically almost in the room, using the materials and accessing the materials and using it to develop their own work. And I think it's more, the organisation itself knows much more about its history and how it developed because we have this archive collection. So we have that point of view where it's there as a, not just as an administrative tool for the organisation, but also a curatorial tool, that this material is there. And I think a part of what I've tried to do is, with what we do, is try to integrate the archive and library into our actual active exhibition program. So we try to do things that are associated with what the exhibitions are, in terms of making sure, I think what we're going to do soon is have basically have materials from it's actually from our library collection will be available during the exhibition in what the communal space we have now with the exhibition, so they will be there for people to access and use. I think in terms of more promoting promoting the archive to external people, what we have is very specific to so when we do get a steady stream of people, but we're not going to be as busy as much of as like us other archives that might have people in every day. So it is always been quite a difficult thing to do, to interact and try to get people to see the archive, especially in I was saying a contemporary art organisation. There are very few contemporary art organisations that have even sort of a library that people can use. So it's always been trying to integrate my way in somehow into what we're doing as an organisation to fit in with what the programme is. So I think that's what we try to do. I think we've also used it, the organisation has also used it as for social media as well, because we've got this such a backlog of material and to do with our exhibitions and things, that it's a very good tool for social media and promoting the organisation as well.
Thank you. That's yeah, that's very good. I suppose that, well, I mean, you're right in a way that not a lot of art organisations have its own archive, and I think EC has a long history now documenting all the work, and you predate many of those back in late 90s. So I think it's a very wonderful collection, especially now you're planning to open up as a public kind of space where people could see it, so it's become a lot more visible. So I'll come back to you a bit more on that as well. Certainly it kind of sprang to mind the AAA, and also that sort of resemblance of what you're doing as well. But I come back to you on these. And Gina, that's wonderful to hear about your research. Finally, that's absolutely great to also look to look at the work as well, and also how the engagement of students in the archival materials in Pocono. And I was very interested in your in your approach of LaTour actor theories, and somehow that's become this a sort of skeleton for you to think about the use of archival materials and also engage with students or even outside the academy. And I think one of the aspects about the active approach is also about the sort of it's almost like the Internet of Things, isn't it? It's all the connections that everything's sort of joined back and related together. And the beautiful thing that you present us is about the renewal of some of those collections and patterns in Pocono collections, which really draw on contemporary relevance. And I want to hear a bit more about how these sort of active approach actually feed back to the progress or the kind of update of Pocono's collection, which is meant to be more historic and more kind of stayed in a particular period of time. Does it actually promote it to sort of progress it to something more in a contemporary sort of contemporary state where it could move itself on with a contemporary designed agenda? So I want to hear a little bit more about the progress of Pocono's collection through your intervention.
What the current company do you mean? Well, they love to come and use the archive because it's obviously here in London. They are up in Derbyshire, I think, but they do come down and use the archive because they're very aware it's such a rich source of information, inspiration. So they look at the furniture designs, they look at the promotional literature. They don't so much look at these textile samples that we have, and they're very interesting. These textile samples, obviously to me particularly, but they are interesting in that they're not widely known about, and they are actually the records that the company kept for themselves. They weren't shown to the public, so they're very much a hidden aspect of the archive, but I think the linking, the student project linked the archive with the new company in such a beneficial way for both groups of people. You know, that the company was able to use the archive and the design thinking and brains of young students. And obviously it's a great opportunity for the students, and it's a great use for the collection, I think. So I'm hoping that this is an example, as a case study, is something that could be replicated elsewhere, and that it was just particularly beautifully synchronous. I don't know if that's the right word, but it all fitted together very well with this outcome. Yeah, but I hope it's something that other researchers could take up with other archives.
Okay. Oh, thank you for this. That's really wonderful. I can see that perhaps one of our audience, is it Marlene Little? We might want to ask a question. Yes, I think I give the floor to you.
Thank you. This is more a comment really for Gina, and an apology because I had to take a call in the middle of it. So your presentation, the flow of it was interrupted a little bit for me. So sorry if I, missed some very important bits, but the comment is really to sort of thank you that through your research, you're presenting to more people all the time the importance and the significance that textiles can contribute within the wider research context. Because as you said, people may think of the furniture design and the promotions and so on, but textiles is often a very inherent, important aspect of many of these collections. And thank you very much for presenting some of the possibilities that you can get from being aware of it. Thanks. Thanks, Gina.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for this comment. That's absolutely wonderful. And I've also seen another hand, Ada. Would you like to switch on your camera? Yes, great.
Hi, yeah, this is Ada. So very nice. Thank you very much for that, for this occasion, and thank you, Katie, for bringing the work. It's interesting of looking back to the work happened there, and I guess for me, yeah, as like artists, also have the kind of the ability to access the archive, and it just kind of trigger a lot of questions thinking about thinking of the future of the organization in relation to how is what is archived, and how to bring different ways for the public to access that archive, and how to get that, because in relation to the topic of material culture and participation, how do we participate in the process of creating a narrative together with I guess with kind of in relation to the identity of organization. So how do we kind of find a balance of choosing what is archived, what is valuable in relation to the archive of the organization? Yeah, I guess it's more a question for Katie.
Right. I thought I said I think in terms of our archive collection, it's mainly that I try to keep anything that documents our activities of the organisation. So we do have. I don't know if people caught that, if I cut off at that point, but I did mention having a retention schedule, and that's more to do with making sure that that's a document, that's an internal document that ensures that people keep. That's more to do with the legal thing to do with that, how long documents should be retained by the organisation before they're sent to the archive. But in terms of what I do as well, I follow that retention schedule, but I also try to make sure that we document as much as we can. I think what I found in our organisation is you find with people, especially in our organisation, it does tend to be that in the past people may have not documented everything they did. So sometimes it's trying to make sure we've got that accurate representation of all our activities. I think even with the material I've been cataloguing, that I've found about events and exhibitions that we knew not, that aren't part of our official record, that appear because I found one document that may refer to an event that happened. And it's really strange that over the years we've been able to build a more accurate history of the organisation because we better understand where the organisation came from. And part of my role at the moment, as well as actually doing the more documentation after things have been transferred to the archive, I'm also actively involved in doing a more records management aspect, which is more making sure that information is documented currently during our activities, and making sure we do document everything we should do, just more to do with things transferring to the archive, but also to the legal responsibilities we have as an organisation to records management. So it's very much, my role is quite a lot of aspects. So there's the archive side of it, but there's also that actual more modern records management, which is making sure the organisation is retaining things and keeping things that it needs to do to be able to transfer to the archive in the future. So it's a delicate balance to between not wanting to interfere too much in what other people do, but also to make sure that that things are documented properly. I think also we have this that's to do with copyright permissions and things that historically we didn't record that information at the time that we had artist contracts. There was a vague sort of statement, but now we're a bit more recording that information at the point that we're working with artists, so we know what they are happy for us to do in the future, and that would save a future archivist role of save them the issue of having to find that information, and if it's all kept together, if we record it properly. So it's a very delicate balance between trying to we can't keep everything because we just don't have the facilities to keep everything, but we have to make sure we keep enough that documents all our activities. So it's a very difficult balance, and I think I'm able to do it because I understand how the organisation works, and also working with other people in the organisation to be able to understand what they create and what they collect. So it's a very difficult thing to do. So I try my best to help to make sure we document things as much as we can, but it does sometimes there are things that don't quite make it. So.
Thank you, Katie. I see another hand. I think it might be our last question because we're also pressed of time. So David, would you like to pull your camera up and ask your question? Thank you, Ada. You mute, David. You have to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Wessie. Yeah, question for Gina, really. Really interesting designs there. Sort of two parts, really. Firstly, I was wondering whether you found it as a designer easier to, or more enjoyable to use historical material as your inspiration, or whether perhaps the new other designing just from scratch, if you like, was more enjoyable. But also I was wondering, always fascinated by the mid-century kind of designs, and they're obviously quite coming back. In your research, did you sort of get any insight into what happened? I mean, obviously we had a big World War II, but apart from that, what what kind of changed in attitudes that led to that very distinctive kind of period of what we now look back on as the sort of mid-century 50s furniture, textile, those kind of graphic designs are very, very distinctive. And I just wondered if you had any insight into sort of who the characters perhaps were behind that, and you know, particularly from a textile point of view.
Well, first of all, yes, I love designing from archive material, particularly for as part of this project, with it having a purpose. So, you know, I find designing much more interesting when I have some kind of purpose behind it, and there's a reason for doing something, which I had with this research. I looked a lot at the history of Parker Knoll, because they're not thought of as leading a leading design company. They're not thought of in the same sort of way as perhaps Eames or some of the other mid-century designers. They're thought of as a very traditional company, and I found actually in their archives that they had tried much more contemporary looking designs, and they tried sort of tubular steel chairs, but they just weren't popular with their public. Their public liked the traditional comfortable styles. And ironically, Parker Knoll were using very innovative structures, because the springing mechanism and the steel frames were very new, but they disguised them with traditional styles. And I mean, modernism was coming across from Europe in the 30s and from Scandinavia, and wasn't popular with the general public. It was popular with a very small elite, really, so probably a London-based elite. I don't know. I've written a lot about this in my thesis, because there's an awful. It's such an interesting area. The way the public rejected the utility designs, which were very Spartan, and the designers of those, the British Design Council was hoping that the public would adopt this more minimal look and take it forward. But after the war, they really wanted to go back to florals and traditional styles. But so it wasn't until the sort of the 50s really that modernism from Europe really gained ground in this country. But it was seen after the war as a very European style, and there was sort of natural sort of resistance to wanting something that had sort of started from Germany, and all the associations of that from the Second World War. So it's a really fascinating area, that.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I think we're right on spot, right on time. And thank you so much, both speakers. They're wonderful presentation and really lovely to see the work as well. And also thank you for our audience. That was just great to have to hear your thoughts, and also have you being very interactive and enjoying the session, I hope. So before we call on a goodbye, I would like to told you that we have a second part of our archive material culture and participation, and that's going to be on the 15th of March. Again, we have two speakers, and this series, I mean, the second part of it, focusing more on heritage and legacy. We have Dr. Akua Morris, and she will present the legacy that resides within everyday objects. And we also have an external speaker, Justin Wong. He will present the birth of new symbols, a visual documentation of Hong Kong. So they are coming from different background, but seemingly also working on archival materials and deriving material cultures out of these archival studies. So I hope you can join us for our second part of our series, which is also Wednesday, 15th of March, 5:30 to 7 o'clock. So once again, I thank you both speaker Katie and Gina for this wonderful sharing session, and also the audience joining us today. So I would say goodbye for now, and I'll see you next time.